For as long as there have been superheroes, fans have asked who would win in a fight. It's one of those ideas that feels ancient, that calls back to mythological tales from across the globe, from Jacob wrestling an angel in the Bible to Ganesha and Kartikeya's race around the world. But in the friendlier times of the 1960s, the competition between Superman and the Flash was presented as a race instead of a bare-fisted brawl. After all, their power sets were very different. There's no doubt that Superman could pound the Flash into a pulp if he wanted to. So comparing their speed seemed like a more balanced competition. When Superman the Animated Series decided to adapt that premise into the episode Speed Demons, it wasn't just indulging in fan service though. It was reenacting decades of comic book history, but in their own way. In the Silver Age of comics, races between Superman and the Flash were a recurring event. They were playful, sometimes ridiculous, and somehow profound. The winner wasn't always clear. Sometimes they'd tie, sometimes they'd stop to save the world mid-race, and then the rest of the time, the Flash would win. But really, the end result wasn't that important. The answer to who's faster was secondary, because the real appeal was the spirit of competition rather than who hit the finish line first. It was the idea that even among the titans of the DC universe, there's mutual respect. Speed Demons inherits that same philosophy. There's no animosity between the competitors, there's some playful banter, sure, but it's all in the spirit of fun. Superman and the Flash don't meet as rivals, but as professionals. They're racing for charity, which immediately presents them as altruists, not egotists. The purpose isn't to decide who's better, it's for the benefit of the less fortunate. But what makes Speed Demons special is how it treats the concept of the superhero race with reverence. The episode understands that the race itself is a piece of superhero folklore, and yeah, it can be silly sometimes, but there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. So the most important thing about the episode is that it introduces this universe to the Flash, technically making it the first crossover episode, not World's Finest, as I erroneously said in my earlier World's Finest video. Whoops. Although I should clarify that the difference here is that the Flash is essentially a brand new character at this point in time. He didn't have his own animated series prior to this, and we'd never seen him before, so it doesn't quite have the same weight and implications as having Batman turn up. But I digress. The fact that there's a passing familiarity between Superman and the Flash implies a living, breathing world beyond what's seen on screen, that there was more going on outside of Metropolis, and that Superman is aware of it. Until then, Superman the Animated Series had operated as a self-contained world. You could argue that the change in art style between Batman the Animated Series and Superman the Animated Series meant that these were two different worlds, but World's Finest definitively put that idea to bed. So Speed Demons was the first time that their world had cracked open, letting a little of the larger DC universe seep in. And in some ways, Speed Demons feels a little bit like the distant sound of thunder ahead of the massive storm that was World's Finest bringing Batman into the picture. Right, I promise I'm going to stop talking about World's Finest now, this is about Speed Demons. As an introduction to the Flash, Speed Demons works very well. The episode never turns the Flash into an antagonist. He's cocky, yes, maybe even a little irritating, but he enjoys the spotlight, cracking jokes and flirting with the cameras. But it's all surface level bravado. Underneath, he's heroic to the core. This is perfectly demonstrated when Superman spots a ship in distress during the race. The pair drop everything to help. Yes, Flash initially thinks it's a joke on Superman's part, but as soon as he realizes that people are in danger, he turns around to go and help them. Superman, for his part, isn't threatened by the Flash's swagger, though. He's kind of amused by it and gives back some sass of his own. It's a dynamic that the Justice League series would later lose, which I think was a bit of a shame. The Flash of Justice League and Justice League Unlimited feels like a different character. They explicitly state that he is Wally West, a seemingly younger, sillier, and more comedic figure. There's no sense that he's the same man from Speed Demons aside from the similar costume and having the same powers, I mean. This raises an intriguing question. Was this even meant to be the same Flash at all? I think that he probably was, but the DCAU creative team at the time really weren't all that interested in continuity, as director Dan Reba mentions in the foreword to my new book Rogues Gallery, available now on Amazon, cheap plug. They just wanted to make the best shows they could. But that would come later on and has little bearing on this episode. What's easy to overlook is just how cinematic this episode is. The race sequences still hold up very well today. The sound design, the movement of the clouds, the rumble of the ground as Superman and the Flash streak past, it's all tremendous. Of course, this is an episode of an action cartoon, not a sports drama, so the story needed a villain for the two heroes to defeat. Enter the Weather Wizard. He is traditionally a Flash villain, so it makes sense for him to turn up in this episode. He orchestrated the charity race to use the kinetic energy generated by the two running around the planet to charge his weather controlling machine. It's pure Silver Age hokiness, and I think it's great. And the DCAU take on the Weather Wizard is pretty interesting too. The comic book Weather Wizard debuted in 1959's The Flash number 110, and he was the quintessential Silver Age Flash villain. He had a flashy name, pun intended, a science-based backstory, and a colour-coded gimmick that could fill 20 pages with creative chaos. He was Mark Marden, a convicted criminal. His brother Clyde, a scientist, had discovered a way to control the weather through a specialised wand. When Mark escaped from prison, he found his brother dead and stole the tech, turning himself into the Weather Wizard. Unlike Lex Luthor or the Joker, Weather Wizard isn't trying to prove a point. He's in it for the thrill, the payday, and occasionally the sadistic pleasure of seeing people run from his storms. The animated Weather Wizard is fairly similar but far less flamboyant. In Speed Demons, he's redesigned to look a bit more generic. He loses the massive wing collar and the green leotard with the curly toes and swaps it for a more practical uniform. He's less of a wizard and more of a technician. They kept the part about his scientist brother developing the tech, but in this case, he is alive and well, at least until Mark attempts to kill him. But here, he is not successful, thanks to the Flash and Superman. It's also worth noting that the Flash was already familiar with Mark before he became the Weather Wizard. The Flash had busted him for a small-time con job at some point in the past. So this story is a good demonstration of how the ordinary criminals of the world reacted to the rise of superheroes. They augmented themselves to become more powerful threats, although with the best will in the world, the Weather Wizard is not much of a threat, and rarely lasted more than a few minutes when battling heroes in these shows. Yes, he has a spectacular ability, but he's a common criminal with no real idea on how to use the power. A normal person might take that power and use it for the betterment of society, preventing droughts or devastating hurricanes. But Mark sees it as a way of extorting money, which is also pedestrian. Really, the Weather Wizard exists here to serve the plot, to give the two heroes something to fight, and you know what, that is okay. Not every villain needs to have a tragic backstory or understandable motivations. Sometimes their greed alone is enough. By the end of the episode, when the day was saved, there was no definitive winner of the race. Just two legends smiling, knowing that they've made the world a better place. Of course, just because there was no official winner, that doesn't mean that the pair don't care about their playful competition. The episode closes with Superman and the Flash racing each other for fun, with the screen fading to black just as the new race begins. And you know what? It doesn't really matter who is faster. Superman and the Flash are very different heroes. Superman is practically a god, someone who came from the stars and was born with fantastic powers that he uses to save us all. The Flash is the result of a weird accident, a man who transcends humanity and becomes a powerful force for good. And their actions are what really matters, not who can run the fastest. Speed Demons stands as one of the earliest examples of how the writers of Superman the Animated Series could weave nostalgia, world building, and character study into a single 20-minute story. It's less about velocity and more about momentum. It's a celebration of what happens when imagination refuses to stand still, when creators look back at the old myths and decide to tell them again with capes and lightning bolts. Superman and the Flash aren't just racing each other, they're racing the passage of time, keeping those archetypes alive for another generation. Two titans run across the world, not to see who's best, but to remind us that the race never really ends. The creative team may not have known it at the time, but it was the first slab in the road to the massive interconnected universe of shows that is still getting talked about some 30 years later, and I think that makes it pretty special. Okay, that's it for this week's essay. If you liked the video, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, leave a comment, tell all your friends about me. You know how YouTube works. If you really enjoyed the video and have the means, please consider making use of the thanks button to send a buck or two my way, because every little helps. I offer channel memberships for $1.99 a month. This will get you early access to my weekly video essay, priority responses to your comments, members-only videos, custom emojis, and an icon on your profile indicating that you're one of my people. And special thanks to my channel members. Everyone who was a member at the time of this video's creation is listed on the screen right now. If you want to see your name amongst all these wonderful people, join the channel now. Next time. When I return on Monday, I'll be going back to the result of my last Beware the Batman villain poll to talk about the ambitious assassin who got a little too big for his britches. It's time to talk about Silver Monkey. And next Friday I'm going to talk about someone that started out with a legitimate grudge and used his powers to seek revenge, but as time went by he saw the error of his ways and reformed. We're going to talk about the rubber band man from Static Shock. Hope to see you then.